Hello, in this video we're going to configure the iSCSI storage on our Active Directory server so that it can act as the clustered central storage for both the Hyper-V1 and Hyper-V2 servers. So we're basically looking at this storage switch and connecting all these three things together and making sure that the Hyper-V1 and Hyper-V2 servers can access using an iSCSI initiator to access the iSCSI target hard drives that we've got on our primary domain controller. I've modified this particular diagram to make it a little bit clearer, color-coded it, and I've changed the IP address of the heartbeat network here. Instead of being 172.25.1, I've made it 11 because we've already got a one network on the outside of my network anyway. So the chances are that anybody will have a 172.25.11 subnet are pretty small. So I'll show you the new diagram. So that's this one here. I just rearranged it slightly. So we've still got, if you look at these black network cards, these are the way out to the internet. I've shown also the NBN router and its IP address, which is the gateway for all three machines. So it's the gateway for all these three machines out to the internet. We've got a host-only card. And you'll notice that these addresses here, they're all now static. No dynamic IP addresses anywhere in any of this at the moment. It's all static, just to make sure it all works. So this PDC, every IP address on this will be .230. In Hyper-V1 it'll be .231, and in Hyper-V2 it'll be .232. So the static IP address out to the physical network in this case is 192.168.1.230, 1.231 and 1.232. Now we've also got a host-only connection which we're going to use to manage these virtual machines once we get everything set up. It's got an IP address of 192.168.64.1. It's a /24 subnet. That's the host-only card that's created by a VM Workstation Player when you install it. And so we've got a 64.230 for the PDC, 192.168.64.231 for Hyper-V1, and 192.168.64.232 for Hyper-V2. Connecting all of those three machines is a storage switch, and I've just got that in the 10.10.10 subnet. Again, this is going to be 10.230, 10.231, 10.232. The storage is going to allow these two Hyper-V machines to access two disks that we're going to create in here on the PDC. So I'm going to create a drive Q for Quorum, 1 GB in size. I'm going to create a drive V for VMs of 50 GB in size. Okay, so that's the green sort of network, all works towards getting access to these iSCSI disks available to both the Hyper-V machines. And then we've got the cluster switch, which is sort of like called the heartbeat switch. And that's just a separate network card in Hyper-V and Hyper-V1 and 2. And it's 172.25.11.231 for Hyper-V1 and .232 for Hyper-V2. And that's just a small private network between those two. They use the Quorum disk that's accessible via the storage switch in order to just keep track of which machine's up and which virtual machines are running on which server. And then if something happens, then the heartbeat will let those two servers know that the other machine is either whether it's up or down, and they can start the highly available proceedings of starting up a virtual machine if if the other server's gone down and it was running a virtual machine. So this is just the revised version of that previous diagram. So this is just the virtual data center logical network diagram revision 2, mainly because it's color-coded and more consistent numbering scheme, I think, is probably important for when we're looking at this. And the main thing for us to know is that the 192.168.64 is the management subnet, 192.168.1 is the internet, 10.10.10 is the storage, and 172.25.11 is the heartbeat network. So they're the 4 major networks that we've got. Obviously the PDC doesn't participate in the heartbeat, but it does in the storage network. So what we're going to do is flip across to our virtual machines that are running in VM Workstation Player. I've actually got all 3 of them up at the moment. So I've got the PDC, the Hyper-V1 and the Hyper-V2. Currently not showing anything, but we'll make sure all the IP addresses are okay in those before we move into creating the iSCSI storage. So let's go to our PDC. If you hit Control-Alt-Insert, you inject a Control-Alt-Delete into that virtual machine. And I'm just logging in as per normal. And we just want to make sure that all of our networks are set up properly. So let's just go across to our local server. All of the network interface cards will come up here. Okay, so I've got 1.230, 64.230, but I've got 10.10.10.1. I'm going to change that to 10.10.10.230. Okay, so if I just click on that, the first card is that card there. So if I look at the properties and look at the IP version 4 in the properties, sorry, that's the one that goes out. And because that's the one that goes out to the internet, it should have a default gateway of 192.168.1.254, which you can see up here is the IP address of my router out of the network. So that's that network. Whoops, back in here, yep. Okay. Let's check this network properties. The second one should be the bridge to the this is the 64 subnet. Yep, 64.230, everything's right. Doesn't have a default gateway. And the second network, or the third network in this case, properties, IP version 4. And we can see I'm going to change that to a 230. Okay, so we've got all the IP addresses matching what we've got in our diagram. So that's the 230 network, so 64.230, 1.230, 10.230. So we've put all that right. Let's go to the Hyper-V1 and make sure we've got the right things set there as well. Okay, Control-Alt-Insert. Put our password. Helps if you put the right one in, of course. Okay, we're going to go to local servers. And what we want to do is check the IP addresses. So we've got the storage network set correctly, the management network set correctly, and this one here, I want to change that to 11. So let's just check. We've got a lot of cards here. Okay, we enabled Hyper-V on this machine, that's why we've got a virtual switch. So this is the one that goes out to the internet. That one's the bridged This one is the storage network, which is the one I need to change. No, it should already be 231, and this last one here is the heartbeat network, so we need to change that one. So let's have a look at that. Properties, and look at the IP address, and I'll change that to 11.231. I'll just check the other ones as well. 2. Uh, 10.10.10.231, that's correct for Hyper-V1. And this one's the bridged, sorry, this is the management network. So it should be the 64 subnet. 64.231, yep. And so this one is our way out to the internet. IP version 4. Okay. It's now using our Hyper-V virtual switch to get out. Okay, so you won't see that one because it's actually on this one here, I think. Yeah, it's got a gateway of 1.254, so it's going to get out to the internet. Okay. And just to prove that it does, what we'll do is run the command prompt. And ping 8.8.8.8, which is the Google DNS server. And you can see it gets out to the internet. It's quite fine. Okay. Actually, I'd like the CMD on the taskbar. So let's just pin it to the taskbar. Okay, so now it's down here. Okay, so let's check Hyper-V2, make sure all its IP addresses. We want to make sure we change it to 11.232 for Hyper-V2. Out and go to Hyper-V2 and Control-Alt-Insert to give and then password, the usual password. Okay, we'll go to the local server and we're going to check the IP addresses. It's really only the fourth card that needs changing, which is Ethernet 3. You see that the Ethernet 0 has disappeared because it's been replaced by the virtual switch. Ethernet 3, this one here. So Ethernet 3 is the one we need to change. IP version 4 and properties, and it should be 11.232. You need some updates. No, I don't. Let's go OK. And I'll just check the other ones as well. So properties on this, it's 10.10.10.232, which is good. And number 1 should be 64.232. 64.232. Good. Okay, and of course you can't see anything on this one because the IP version 4 gets disabled when you put the switch in. The Hyper-V switch on it, it takes over. Okay, and when you look at the Hyper-V switch, which is that one there, what you see is the gateway out. Okay, and we'll prove that this one gets out to the internet as well, just to make sure. So we'll do a CMD on that. And we'll send that to the taskbar just for fun. And we'll run it. And we'll ping 8.8.8.8. Yep. And that gets out to the internet as well, which is what we expect. Exit out of that. Okay, so what we've done is we have made sure that it matches the revised data center logical network diagram. It's mainly just for consistency in the IP numbering schemes that we're using, that's all. I just didn't want another one network. Although I've already got I've got a 64 network there and a one subnet here, I didn't want another one subnet here, even though it's got a different qualifiers at the front, 172.25. And that was just me. Okay, so what we need to do now is to install the iSCSI stuff on our PDC and make it shareable to our Hyper-V 1 and 2 using this storage network, so using the 10 subnet here. Okay, so what we're going to do is go to our PDC. That's where we need to do it. And in our file and storage services, we need to install the iSCSI feature. So if we have a quick look at the tools, there is an iSCSI initiator, but not an iSCSI target. And we need this thing to be an iSCSI server or target for everybody else to use. The other thing that we need to look at is the disks and the way that they're set up. So just to show you, I'm going to do a right mouse click on the start and go to the disk management. And the way that we've got this is we've got this set up as here's our basic drive, 150 gig, and I created two 60 gigabyte drives and I've mirrored them. Okay, so they're a mirrored drive M. Okay, and what we're going to do is we're going to create our iSCSI virtual disks for 1 gigabyte for the core and 50 gigabytes for virtual machines, and so we're going to create them on this mirrored 60 gigabyte hard drive subsystem. Now that could be a proper RAID hard, like a physical hard drive rated, or in my case, this one here is just a software-based RAID. But it gives a measure of resilience to the file system as well, which is always good. Okay, so what we need is the iSCSI stuff in here. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to the dashboard and add that role or feature. So we're going to go next on this. That's the server that we want to do it to. And if we expand out the file and storage services, you can see it mentions iSCSI there. We're going to expand that out as well. And what we want to do is set this as an iSCSI target server. Tick that box there. Go next. And go next again. And it tells us all that. We can restart. It doesn't need to restart. We'll just hit install. Okay. Now this can take a period of time. So I'll just pause the video while this is doing that. Okay, so you can see that we've the installation has succeeded. Hit close on that. And so when we look at our tools, we'll see now that we've got, actually I'll need to do a refresh first. Hit the refresh button, because I couldn't see it. We'll notice we've got a second notification there as well. So we can see that that installation succeeded, and I can get rid of that notification, we don't need it. If I go and have a look at the tools now, I can see the iSCSI initiator. Click on the iSCSI over here. Okay, so now I've got the feature, and this is how you create the iSCSI virtual disk. Okay, create new iSCSI virtual disk wizard. There's a wizard there because there's currently no iSCSI virtual disks. So what we're going to do is we're going to create these two iSCSI disks and make them available to these two IP addresses, HV1 and HV2. Okay, so let's click on the wizard here. And it picks up our two drives, drive C and our drive M for our mirrored drive. So there's our 60 gigabyte drive. And we're going to create it on this. So the storage location is that's the one we want to use. We don't want to do that. Go away. Okay. Okay, so what we're doing is we're moving down this list here. So what we've done is we've selected where we want the drive to be. And then we're going to go next. And the name of this is, I'm just going to call this the quorum disk. So the quorum is the one that acts as the arbitrator between the two Hyper-V virtual machines. The heartbeat works with it to make sure that both servers are up. If they're not, then the high availability features can be enabled. Okay, so I'm just going to call this quorum, and this is on the iSCSI target machine. So I'm going to call it quorum target. Quorum target, that's the name of it. It's probably, let's put it in the notes. Okay. Quorum disk. That'll do, just quorum disk like that. So it's going to create, you can see on our drive M, our mirrored drive, it's going to create this iSCSI virtual disks / and quorum VHDX. Now the VHDX is Microsoft's virtual hard disk format. Okay, it's a bit like if you're using VirtualBox, it's VDI, they've got VHD. Okay, so we're going to go next. The size in gigabytes, as per our network diagram to the right there, we're going to make it 1 gigabyte in size. I'll make it dynamically expanding, leave it like that, so I'll go next. This is to assign iSCSI virtual disk to an existing iSCSI target or to create a new target for it. So I want to create a new target. I think you just hit next. And the name of the target. Okay, so this is to create a new iSCSI target. We've created the disk. Can I create another disk? No, just that one. New iSCSI target. The other one I probably should have called it quorum disk or something like that. So this is the target name that other people are going to use. So this is the quorum for the cluster. I'm going to call it understood CL for cluster, something like that. Okay. Quorum cluster or something like that. Quorum target, let's call it quorum target. I probably should have sorted out all the naming conventions in here as well. Okay. Next. Okay, so it doesn't like the underscore. So it's going to convert it to quorum target with a hyphen. So we'll do that. Okay. But it did drop all of the capitals, which, you know, Let's see if that handles it. Quorum target. Okay. So here's where we add the initiators. So the initiators are going to be, in our case, they're going to be Hyper-V1 and Hyper-V2. So we need to put the IP addresses in this storage network. So when we're creating this disk here, we're telling which IP addresses are allowed to access it. Is what we're doing. Okay. So we're going to add a query the initiator computer ID, not supported. Okay. When you do this, and you can browse and try and find it, there's also a whole range of different ways, an IQN number, DNS name, IP address, MAC address. I'm going to just use the IP address, and I'm going to go 10.10.10.231 because that's the Hyper-V1. And I'm going to add the Hyper-V2 in there as well. Let's go IP address 10.10.10.232. So we added the two IP addresses in for the two different servers. Here you can enable encryption and that on the authentication and everything. We could do that, but that would just needlessly complicate things at the moment. So in a production environment, you might want to set this up. In a practice environment like we're doing, test lab, then we don't really need to. So I'm going to go next. And that's just the confirmation that this is all what we're going to do. We're going to hit create and close. Okay, so we've got our first iSCSI target disk in there, but what we want to do is create a second one. Can we just right mouse click it? We can go new iSCSI virtual disk. Okay, we're going to pick the drive, which is our 60 gigabyte drive. We're going to go next. The name of this one's going to be called, this was just VMs. So VMs or virtual machines, or the place where you're going to put all your virtual machines. Repository for virtual machines. Go next. We've got 59.9 gigabytes. We can use whatever size we want. 50 gigabytes is good. It's going to be dynamically expanding. And we'll go next. We want a new iSCSI target for it. We don't want to use an existing one. We want to use a new one. And this one's going to be VM's target. Okay, so I put the hyphen in instead of the underscore this time. Okay, let's go next. And here's where we want to add the initiators, which is the HV1, HV2. So we're going to go add. Again, we'll pick the IP address. 10.10.10.231. And we'll add in the 232. Let's just go IP address. It's 10.10.10.232. Okay, so we've got the two Hyper-V1, Hyper-V2. We'll go next. We'll ignore the authentication for the moment. Next, that's the confirmation, and then we'll hit create. Okay, so what we've got now is two virtual drives. Okay, so here's the virtual drives that's been created. These are iSCSI virtual disks that have been created, and we've told the iSCSI service here who the initiators can be. Okay, now the question is, can you, say you add another machine into the cluster, can you add IP addresses into here? Yes, you can. Okay, so that can be done. So you could add another machine into into the cluster if you wanted to later on. Okay, so that's the creation of this. What we need to do now is to go to the two Hyper-V machines and to connect those virtual hard drives via iSCSI to those Hyper-V servers. Okay, so what we're going to do now is flip across to Hyper-V1 and okay, so what we want to do now is use the Hyper-V initiator that's in here, which we've already got in the tools. So there's the initiator. Oh, it's not running. Okay. Click the yes button if we want it to run. Okay, that helps. Okay, so here's the initiator. What we need to do is connect to our PDC. So its IP address is 10.10.10.230. So we are going to go 10.10.10.230. Do a quick connect. And you can see both of these are there. So I'm going to connect. Please select a single target for login using Quick Connect. And let's connect the other one as well. Okay, they're both connected. That's the VM's target, and that's the quorum target. Okay, we've got both of those connected. Okay, and we need to do this also on Hyper-V2, of course. Okay. Connect properties, okay. Discovery, that's okay. Favorite targets. What we need to look at is the volumes and devices. Okay. Automatically configure all the available devices. Let's go auto configure. So it automatically picks up our two SCSI devices, and that's all we need to do at the moment. Radius and configuration, radius, configuration. No, we don't need to worry about that. So basically we set the targets and then go to volumes and devices and go auto configure. So hit OK on that. So we've connected those two iSCSI virtual machines to our HV1 server. So what we need to do is right mouse click and go to the disk management, because at the moment they're just blank disks. And what you can see here is those two drives appearing as simple drives. These things are all offline. Okay, so what we want to do is turn them online for a start. Turn that online and turn that one online. And okay, so they're not initialized yet, so I need to initialize them. So I need to initialize the disk. It's found both disks, which is good. So I'm just going to use MBR, master bit record. You can use global unique identifier partition table if you want. Doesn't really matter, GPT. So now we can see that they're online disks, but they're unallocated. They're just raw disks. So we're going to create a new simple volume here. Use the whole lot. This is the 1 GB, so it's the quorum drive. So let's call this Q for quorum. And go next. And we're going to give it a name. I'm going to call it quorum. Okay. And finish. Now the important thing between Hyper-V1 and Hyper-V2 is that we set up everything exactly the same. Because when we cluster these two machines together, having everything the same, when we create our virtual machines, they're used to using drives with particular drive letters. They're located in, you know, our iSCSI storage on a particular drive letter. And so all of that gets put into the configuration files. And if we swap servers from Hyper-V1 to Hyper-V2, then all the drive letters and all the names need to be exactly the same. And that way there's no issues with the virtual machine restarting and not having any problems. Okay, so there's our quorum disk here. Let's create a new simple volume on our virtual machines. I'm going to call that drive V for virtual machines. New volume name is just going to be called VMs. Finish. So quorum and VMs, that's what it is. Okay, so we need to do this same thing on Hyper-V2, okay? And you know, just to prove, if you open up your file manager here, you'll see on you'll see all of these quorum drives, and these disks don't actually reside on this machine. They actually reside on our PDC. Okay, so they're actually over here, and we're going to make Hyper-V2 also look at exactly the same drives, and so we've actually got Hyper-V1 and Hyper-V2 accessing the same volumes, and they can do it at the same time because it's a shared storage. Okay, so that's Hyper-V1. So let's move to Hyper-V2 and do the same thing there. So let's log in. And okay, so on here what we need to do is run our iSCSI initiator. It's not running the service, so if we click yes, then it'll start automatically each time the computer restarts. And our target is going to be the IP address of our PDC, so that's 10.10.10.230. We'll do a quick connect. And it finds both disks, so we're going to connect to both disks and go done. We're then going to go to volumes and devices, and we're going to do an auto configure. So it picks up both disks, and that's all we need to do in here. So connecting to iSCSI devices somewhere else is actually pretty easy. Now what we need to do is go to our disk manager. So right mouse click and go to our disk manager. And what you'll see here is that these are offline, basically. So we just need to put these online. And it picks them up as, oh, but it's drive D. We want it to be drive Q. So right mouse click, let's change the drive letter and change the drive letter to Q. Q for quorum. Yep, we don't care about that. So now it's the same drive letter as on HV1. Let's do the same thing here. Let's put it online. It puts headers drive D. Obviously we have to change that. So that's going to be change drive letter. Change it to drive V. So it's the same as the one on Hyper-V1. So now we've got, and you notice here we didn't have to format the raw disk or anything like that. We did that on HV1. We actually formatted the drive, and so everything's all set up. It's all there. And so they've got access to this now. Okay, so the important thing for us is that we have now, if I just exit out of this, let's put that back to there, back to, okay, we'll just need to check here that on the, sorry, there you can see on our we've got the quorum disk and the V for the VMs disk, the same as we have on Hyper-V 1. So this one's got a DVD in it as well, but it's got a Q for quorum and a V for VMs disk, and they're all same drive letter, all the rest of it. Okay, so really that ends this particular video, and let's just kill that. It's yep. Okay, so what we've done, just in summary, is we've created these, or we've installed the iSCSI target service on our PDC, and we've created these two virtual disks using the software rated hard drives we had attached to the PDC, and we shared it out and told which other IP addresses were allowed to connect to it, so 10.231 and 10.232, and then we moved across to each of the Hyper-V machines, opened up the iSCSI initiator, enabled it so that that service would run every time you reboot, and then connected back to these virtual machines and made sure that they had the same drive letter. Okay, so the next video will be all about clustering these two machines together, which will then use this heartbeat network, and we'll use the quorum disk in order to keep that heartbeat and to manage configurations between the Hyper-V servers. And we'll also then create a virtual machine in the cluster. So first of all, we're going to create the cluster, then we'll then create the virtual machine and look at high availability and live migration. So that might actually be the third video, but creating the cluster is the next video. Okay.